My name is Ava Morgan. 3 years ago, I was the woman refilling champagne glasses at the Executive Wives Charity Gala. I wore a fitted black uniform, my hair pulled into a tight bun, my smile practiced and professional. I blended into the background, invisible but necessary. And that's exactly how she liked it. Vanessa Whitmore, the CEO's wife, president of the elite Women's Heritage Club. She didn't just attend the club, she owned the room, controlled the narrative, controlled the people, controlled who was worthy. That night, she humiliated me over spilled drink that wasn't even mine. She called me careless. Staff should know their place, she said loudly, so everyone could hear. I knew my place. I was staff. But what she didn't know, I was also studying business law at night. Saving. Investing. Watching. And 3 years later, when I signed the acquisition papers for the very club she ruled like a throne, she was still calling me the help. Until I revoked her membership. The Heritage Club looked like something out of an old money magazine spread. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, crystal chandeliers glowing like captive stars, and the soft hum of string music floating through the ballroom like it belonged there. I didn't. I was 19. Working the late shift. Black uniform. Sensible heels. Hair pulled so tight it felt like my thoughts were tied back with it. My job was simple. Circulate, refill, smile, disappear. Disappear especially. The women in that room wore legacy like perfume. It clung to them. You could smell generational wealth in the way they stood. Shoulders relaxed, posture unbothered. They weren't worried about rent or tuition or how many hours they'd need to work this week. I was. That night was the annual Elite Women's Heritage Gala. Invitation only, photographed, sponsored, curated. I'd been assigned to the inner tables, the priority circle. That's where she sat today. Vanessa Whitmore. Even before I knew her name, I knew her rank. You could tell by the way other women leaned slightly toward her when she spoke. By the way laughter followed her half a second too eagerly. By the way staff stiffened when she raised her hand. She didn't look cruel. That was the tricky part. She looked polished. Composed. Perfect. I remember balancing a silver tray of champagne flutes when I heard the crack of glass. It wasn't me. A newer server, maybe 16, had tripped near the edge of the dance floor. One flute shattered. A tiny accident in a massive room. The music didn't stop. But Vanessa did. She turned her head slowly, like a queen annoyed by a draft in the throne room. Then she stood. Honestly, she said, loud enough to stretch across nearby tables. This is why background people should remain background. The words weren't screamed. They didn't need to be. Laughter followed, soft, uncomfortable, complicit. I felt it land on my skin like cold water. The young server froze, cheeks burning red. I moved instinctively to help her gather the broken glass. It was what staff did. We cleaned. Quietly. Efficiently. As I crouched, Vanessa looked directly at me. Not through me. At me. And in that glance was something worse than anger. Dismissal. I wasn't a person in that room. I was infrastructure. Furniture that moved. Careful, she added lightly. Some of you don't understand the cost of things. The irony nearly made me laugh. I understood cost better than anyone there. I understood tuition invoices and overdue electricity bills. I understood budgeting down to the last dollar. I understood working double shifts so my mother wouldn't have to. But I didn't say anything. Because staff don't respond. Staff smile. So I stood up, adjusted my tray, and continued serving. But something shifted in me that night. Not humiliation. Clarity. For the first time, I saw the architecture of power clearly. It wasn't just money. It was perception. It was access. It was ownership of the room. And I realized something else. She thought I belonged on the outside. But I had been studying business law every morning before my shifts. I had been reading financial reports between breaks. I had been watching how these women invested, how they spoke, how they moved influence like chess pieces. They saw a server. I saw a system. When the gala ended and the chandeliers dimmed, I stayed behind to stack chairs. The ballroom felt smaller without the noise. Less intimidating. More human. I stood in the center of the empty room and looked around. That night, I made a quiet promise. I would never beg for space at a table again. One day, I would own the table. And no one in that glittering room had any idea that the invisible girl clearing their glasses was already planning her way in. Not with anger. Not with revenge. With strategy. That was the night I stopped wanting to be seen. And started preparing to be undeniable. People think power lives in chandeliers. It doesn't. It lives in paperwork. After that night, I stopped looking at the Heritage Club as a workplace. I started looking at it like a case study. Every gala, every luncheon, every charity auction, I watched. While refilling glasses, I listened to investment conversations. While clearing plates, I memoized names of board members. While they debated philanthropy over imported wine, I studied their language. They weren't just socializing. They were networking capital. I was finishing my MBA at night, specializing in corporate restructuring. My professors talked about acquisition strategies and distressed assets. Meanwhile, I was literally serving hors d'oeuvres to a distressed asset wrapped in diamonds. Because behind the glamour, the Heritage Club was bleeding. It wasn't obvious. That's how legacy institutions survive, with denial dressed as dignity. But I noticed the signs. Fewer event bookings. Vendors paid later and later. Maintenance requests delayed. Membership renewals quietly shrinking. The older members clung to tradition. The younger wealthy wives preferred modern private networks. Digital communities. International travel clubs. The Heritage Club felt outdated. And pride kept them from evolving. Especially Vanessa. She believed prestige was permanent. It isn't. One night, I overheard two board members whispering near the terrace. If we don't secure new funding within 2 years, we can't raise dues again. The backlash last time was brutal. I kept my eyes down. But my mind was racing. 2 years. That meant vulnerability. That meant leverage. I went home that night and pulled public financial records. Most elite clubs structure as private non-profit associations, but property ownership details are traceable. And that's when I found it. The building wasn't owned by the club. It was leased. Long-term lease. 30 years. But the landlord, an aging real estate developer with no heirs involved in the business. My pulse quickened. Because buildings are assets. And assets can change hands. Over the next 6 months, I built something quietly. I cut unnecessary spending from my life. No more impulse purchases. No more weekend splurges. I increased my consulting hours on the side, small business audits, financial modeling, remote bookkeeping. Every dollar went into an investment fund. But I wasn't naive. I knew I couldn't buy a property like that alone. So I started networking. Not in ballrooms. In boardrooms. Through alumni connections. Through startup founders I'd helped restructure. Through one retired attorney who liked my unusual ambition, as he called it. I never mentioned the club directly. I framed it as a commercial acquisition opportunity in a prime location with underutilized branding potential. Which wasn't a lie. Meanwhile, I still worked events. Still smiled. Still invisible. Vanessa continued ruling the room, unaware that the foundation beneath her heels was something I was actively studying. She once told a table, "Institutions like ours are untouchable." I almost choked on a laugh. Nothing is untouchable. Everything has a price. You just have to know where to look. And I had found the crack. It wasn't in the ballroom. It was in the lease. And from that moment on, I wasn't just observing power. I was preparing to buy it. Scandals don't knock. They erupt. The first headline broke on a Tuesday morning. Whitmore Global under investigation for financial irregularities. I was in the middle of reviewing a client's balance sheet when the notification lit up my phone. I stared at the screen for a long moment before clicking. Government audit. Suspicious offshore transfers. Regulatory scrutiny. Stock dropped 11% before noon. By the end of the week, It was down 27%. The Heritage Club didn't mention it publicly, of course. Institutions like that survive on silence. But the shift in atmosphere was immediate. At the next luncheon, the energy felt tighter. Conversations hushed when phones buzzed. Laughter didn't linger as long. And Vanessa. She still walked in like royalty. But now there was something new behind her smile. Strain. Prestige can survive embarrassment. It cannot survive financial instability. Within weeks, sponsorship checks from Whitmore Global slowed. Charity pledges were quietly postponed. Renovation plans for the East Wing were under review. Board members began holding closed-door meetings. I refilled their water glasses and listened. Cash reserves are thinner than projected. If membership continues declining, we can't afford negative press tied to leadership right now. Leadership. Meaning her. For the first time, Vanessa wasn't untouchable. She was expensive. And when powerful people become expensive liabilities, institutions start calculating. Meanwhile, I deepened my research. The landlord, Arthur Mendel, was 73, semi-retired, with commercial properties across the state. The Heritage Club building was one of his oldest assets. Prime land. Historic structure. Long-term tenants are comfortable tenants. But comfort breeds complacency. The lease had a clause. A purchase option window. The club had been offered first right of refusal 5 years earlier. They declined. Too proud to buy what they thought they controlled. That arrogance. That was the crack. I requested a meeting with Mendel under Morgan Holdings, the company I had quietly formed months earlier. Not as Ava the server. As Ava the investor. When I walked into his office, I wore confidence like armor. Tailored blazer. Calm posture. No apology in my voice. He studied me carefully. "You're young," he said. "I'm prepared," I replied. He liked that answer. Over the next several weeks, we negotiated. I presented growth projections, redevelopment possibilities, brand revitalization plans. I showed him how the club's current leadership was draining potential from the property. He wasn't sentimental. He was strategic. Which meant he understood one thing. If the Heritage Club collapsed, the building's value would dip. Selling now, at peak location demand, was smart. The number he gave me was high. Very high. I didn't flinch. Because I wasn't alone. Behind me stood 3 silent partners, investors who believed in my plan to modernize the institution. But the agreement was clear. I would hold majority control. I would make operational decisions. I would be the face. The final document sat in front of me one Thursday afternoon. Purchase agreement. Non-disclosure terms. Transfer timeline. Once signed, the ground beneath the chandeliers would no longer belong to Legacy. It would belong to me. I held the pen for a moment longer than necessary. Not out of doubt. Out of awareness. 3 years ago, I was kneeling on marble floors picking up shattered glass while Vanessa laughed about background people. Now I was about to own the marble. I signed. The sound of pen on paper was quiet. But it echoed louder than any applause in that ballroom. The transfer would be finalized within 90 days. The board would receive formal notice. And Vanessa. She would still be planning spring gala themes, completely unaware that the foundation she stood on was no longer secured by her husband's influence. Power doesn't collapse loudly. It shifts silently. And the shift had already begun. Ownership didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with emails. Certified letters. And legal language so dry it could suffocate ego. 90 days after I signed the purchase agreement, the transfer finalized at 9:12 a.m. on a Monday. No champagne. No applause. Just confirmation. Morgan Holdings. Sole property owner. I stared at the screen for a long moment. 3 years of study. 18 months of planning. 6 months of negotiation. And now, the building belonged to me. But ownership isn't power until it's revealed. And revelation is timing. The club's board received formal notification that afternoon. A neutral-toned legal letter informing them the property had been sold and that all lease terms would remain temporarily intact pending review. Temporarily. That word spreads faster than gossip. By evening, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Unknown numbers. Board members. Legal advisors. A request for an emergency meeting. They wanted to meet the new owner. Of course they did. Prestige hates uncertainty. I scheduled it for Friday at noon. In the very ballroom where I used to carry trays. The days leading up to the meeting were surreal. I still worked one final event shift before officially resigning. No one knew yet. I walked across the same marble floors, but everything felt different. Not because the room changed. Because I had. Vanessa was there that night, hosting a charity planning session. She was in ivory silk, diamonds resting perfectly at her collarbone. She laughed loudly at something someone said. She looked invincible. And that's the thing about invincibility. It's often just a lack of updated information. She walked past me at one point, not recognizing me. Why would she? I had always been background noise. Champagne, she said, barely glancing. I handed her a glass. Thank you, she added, the way someone thanks an automated machine. I almost smiled. Friday arrived. I didn't wear black. I wore structure. An ivory-tailored suit. Hair down. Heels that didn't apologize on marble floors. Minimal jewelry. Maximum presence. When I entered the club, I didn't go to the service entrance. I walked through the front doors. The receptionist froze. I have a meeting with the board, I said calmly. Conference room A was already filled. 8 board members. 2 attorneys. And Vanessa. She sat at the head of the table, posture straight, chin lifted. When I stepped inside, there was a flicker of confusion in the room. They were expecting someone older. Someone male. Someone established. I placed my leather portfolio on the table. Good afternoon, I said evenly. I'm Ava Morgan, sole proprietor of Morgan Holdings. The silence hit like a dropped chandelier. Vanessa blinked. Recognition came slowly. You could see it forming, memory searching through categories. Staff. Server. Background. And then it clicked. Her lips parted slightly. Oh, she said. Not warm. Not friendly. Just, oh. I took a seat at the opposite end of the table. I understand you have questions regarding the property transfer. One board member leaned forward. This is highly irregular. We've leased this property for decades. And the lease remains valid, I replied. For now. That word again. For now. Vanessa finally spoke, tone measured but tight. And what exactly are your intentions, Ms. Morgan? Intentions. Such a polite word for fear. My intention, I said calmly, is to ensure the sustainability and growth of this institution, which, according to publicly available financial records, has declined 18% in active membership over 3 years. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. You've been studying us. Yes, I said softly. Very closely. The room felt smaller. Because for the first time, I wasn't serving power. I was sitting across from it. And the loudest thing in that ballroom wasn't the women who used to laugh at me. It was the realization settling in their chests. The ground had shifted. And they hadn't felt it move. Yet. The room didn't explode. It tightened. That's what happens when powerful people realize control is no longer automatic. Vanessa leaned back in her chair slowly, folding her hands like she was still the one presiding. You're very ambitious, she said. But ownership of a building doesn't grant you cultural authority. Translation. You don't belong here. I didn't react. It grants operational leverage, I replied evenly, which tends to influence culture over time. One of the older board members cleared her throat. Ms. Morgan, what exactly do you want? Ah, there it was. They assumed I wanted something from them. Money. Recognition. Revenge. I opened my portfolio calmly and slid printed documents across the table. Financial summaries. Membership trends. Vendor complaints. Staff turnover rates. Your institution isn't failing, I said carefully. But it's declining. Quietly. Vanessa's jaw tightened. We've maintained standards for decades. Yes, I said. But standards without adaptation become liabilities. That landed. Because they knew it was true. Another board member leaned forward. Are you planning to raise the lease? Possibly, I answered. But that depends on restructuring discussions. Vanessa's composure flickered for just a second. And if we refuse? Her voice was calm, but beneath it, challenge. I met her gaze fully now. Then when the lease expires, I have redevelopment options. The word redevelopment hit differently. Because this wasn't just a building. It was their status symbol. Their social throne. Their curated kingdom. To them, losing it wasn't financial. It was identity erosion. Vanessa straightened. You would demolish a century of heritage. I tilted my head slightly. I would modernize a business that's underperforming. The difference in wording was intentional. She operated in emotion. I operated in structure. Silence stretched. For the first time since I'd known her, Vanessa looked unsettled. Not loud. Not angry. Just calculating. Because she understood something now. I wasn't impulsive. I wasn't dramatic. And I wasn't bluffing. One of the attorneys spoke up. What are your proposed changes? Finally. A practical question. I slid forward another document. Rebranding strategy. Tiered membership models. Transparency reporting. Sponsorship diversification. Community outreach partnerships. The board members scanned the pages. Vanessa didn't. She kept looking at me. As if trying to reconcile the girl who once held a champagne tray with the woman who now held leverage. You were staff, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes. And you've been planning this? No, I corrected gently. I've been preparing. Her throat moved slightly. Because deep down, she knew the difference. Planning can be reactive. Preparation is patient. And patience wins rooms. The board began murmuring among themselves, flipping through my proposal. One woman whispered, this could actually work. Another nodded slowly. Momentum was shifting. And Vanessa felt it. She leaned forward again, this time softer. If you think this is personal. It isn't, I interrupted calmly. That surprised her more than anything. I didn't buy this building to punish anyone. I bought it because it was undervalued. Her eyes searched mine. Maybe looking for anger. Bitterness. Vindication. But I gave her none. Because this wasn't revenge. It was leverage executed cleanly. The meeting ended without fireworks. But something far more dangerous happened. The board asked for a follow-up strategy session. With me. Not with Vanessa. As I stood to leave, Vanessa spoke one more time. You think ownership makes you powerful? I paused at the door. No, I said quietly. Structure does. And as I walked out of the room, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Because the throne hadn't shattered. It had shifted. And the woman who once laughed about background people was now sitting in a room she didn't control anymore. And she knew it. 2 weeks later, I returned with finalized restructuring documents. This time, the board didn't question my presence. They waited for it. The revised bylaws were clear. Professional conduct standards would now apply to all members, regardless of title, marriage, or influence. Formal complaints from staff, vendors, or members would be reviewed by an independent ethics panel. Vanessa didn't interrupt as I explained. She didn't have to. She already knew where this was heading. Because over the years, multiple informal complaints had been made about her treatment of staff. They were dismissed at the time, quietly buried under misunderstandings. But paper trails don't disappear. They accumulate. When the vote passed, 6-2, the room felt colder. The new conduct clause became effective immediately. And under that clause, 3 prior documented incidents qualified for review, including the gala night. I didn't look at her when I said it. I didn't need to. The structure was speaking now. And structure doesn't flinch. I didn't revoke her membership in front of an audience. Power doesn't need spectators. After the board meeting ended, I asked Vanessa to stay behind. The room emptied slowly, the doors closing with a heavy finality. For the first time in years, she wasn't surrounded by admiration, just silence. She remained seated at the head of the table. Old habits. I walked forward and placed a cream-colored envelope in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, though I could tell she already knew. "Formal notice," I replied calmly. She opened it carefully. Notice of membership revocation. Grounds: repeated violations of conduct policy and documented mistreatment of staff. Her expression didn't crumble. Vanessa was too practiced for that. But her fingers tightened slightly around the paper. "You created a rule," she said evenly, "and now you're using it against me." "I created a standard," I corrected. "It applies to everyone." Her eyes sharpened. "My husband built this network." "Your husband leased this building," I replied quietly. That landed. She stood slowly. "You think this makes us equal?" "No," I said. "Ownership does." For a moment, she searched my face for revenge. Satisfaction. Bitterness. She found none. "This isn't personal," I added. "It's structural." Silence filled the space between us. "You may reapply in 1 year," I said evenly. "Pending ethics review." Reapply. That word shifted everything. For the first time, Vanessa wasn't the authority in the room. She was subject to it. She walked out without another word. And I didn't celebrate. Because this wasn't revenge. It was consequence. I expected backlash. Whispers. Division. Dramatic exits. Instead, the room exhaled. It started quietly. An email from a longtime member thanking the board for finally prioritizing professionalism. Then another. Then 3 more. Within a week, I had messages from women who admitted they had avoided events for years because of Vanessa's dominance. She made every gathering feel like a hierarchy test. I never felt comfortable bringing new members. Staff always looked terrified. I read every message carefully. Power, when unchecked, creates silence. Remove it, and people begin speaking. The staff noticed it first. Conversations in the service corridor felt lighter. Shoulders weren't stiff when members approached. Laughter sounded real, not cautious. One server pulled me aside after an event. "It feels different now," she said softly. "Safer." That mattered more than headlines ever could. We implemented anonymous reporting systems. Clear conduct expectations. Staff recognition bonuses funded from executive membership fees. At the next gala, the shift was visible. Members mingled without orbiting a single center of gravity. No one controlled the tone of the room. Conversations overlapped naturally. New faces appeared, younger entrepreneurs, diverse professionals, women who had previously been waitlisted. Prestige hadn't disappeared. It had evolved. And something surprising happened. Attendance increased. Donations rose. Energy changed. The club no longer felt like a preserved relic of old influence. It felt like a living institution. Standing in the ballroom that night, I realized something powerful. Removing one person didn't weaken the structure. It strengthened it. Because authority built on fear shrinks rooms. But accountability, it makes them breathe. 6 months after the restructuring, the numbers spoke louder than any argument ever could. Membership increased by 34%. Event bookings doubled. Corporate sponsors, the kind that once hesitated, began reaching out instead of being chased. The Heritage Club wasn't just surviving. It was expanding. We launched leadership panels featuring female founders, non-profit directors, and venture capitalists, not just CEO spouses. We introduced mentorship tiers, opening doors for young entrepreneurs who previously couldn't afford legacy membership fees. The shift wasn't loud. It was strategic. Quarterly financial transparency reports replaced vague summaries. Staff recognition programs became standard practice. Conduct guidelines weren't decorative anymore, they were enforced. And people noticed. Local business publications ran features on the club's modern transformation. Social media buzzed about the refreshed brand. Invitations became sought after again, not because of exclusivity, but because of relevance. Vanessa attempted to rally influence quietly. A few loyal members followed her. A few sponsors hesitated. But influence built on personality fades. Influence built on structure compounds. The club didn't lose prestige. It lost intimidation. And that made it stronger. One evening, as I reviewed financial reports in the office that used to be reserved for executive board members only, I realized something unexpected. I didn't feel victorious. I felt responsible. Because growth isn't revenge. Growth is proof. Proof that leadership isn't about controlling rooms. It's about building systems that outlast you. And as revenue climbed and community impact expanded, one thing became undeniable. The best response to disrespect isn't destruction. It's undeniable success. 9 months after her membership was revoked, Vanessa requested a meeting. Not through the board. Through my office. That alone said everything. She arrived without an entourage. No diamonds layered like armor. No commanding entrance. Just a navy dress, minimal makeup, and composure carefully rebuilt. We sat across from each other in the office that once belonged to the club president. Now it belonged to the owner. You changed everything, she said quietly. I adjusted the structure, I replied. She nodded slowly, studying me. I underestimated you. Yes, I said calmly. No sarcasm. No softness. Just truth. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile. It was reflective. Was this because of that night? She finally asked. The gala? No, I answered honestly. That night didn't create this. It clarified it. She absorbed that. I thought influence was permanent, she admitted. It never is, I said. Only systems last. Her shoulders lowered slightly, not defeated, just aware. I've had time to think, she said. About how I treated people. That mattered more than apology. I believe people can evolve, I told her. That includes you. She looked surprised. You'd consider reinstatement. In time, I said evenly. If the standard is met. Not because she was powerful. Because she was accountable. As she stood to leave, she paused at the door. You don't act like someone who won. I held her gaze. I didn't win, I said calmly. I built something better. And that was the difference. Some people protect thrones. Others build foundations. And foundations don't fear who's sitting on top.